Life has a funny way of teaching you that what's rightfully yours isn't always as clear-cut as you'd think. I'm David Thompson, and I never imagined my quiet life in Oak Ridge Estates would turn into a battle over a piece of concrete I paid for. But here I am, ready to share how my private driveway became the center of a neighborhood war that changed everything. Running my own construction supply business taught me the value of hard work and property rights. After 15 years in the industry, Emma and I decided it was time to invest in our dream home. Oak Ridge Estates seemed perfect, a growing community with spacious lots, good schools for Lucas and Sophie, and just enough distance from the city to feel peaceful. The house we fell in love with sat at the end of a long, winding driveway. It wasn't your typical suburban setup. The previous owner had built a custom 200-foot driveway that curved through a wooded section of the property, creating a beautiful approach to the house. That private drive was actually one of the main selling points for us. Emma loved how it kept the kids away from the main road, and I appreciated the privacy it provided. The first few months were everything we'd hoped for. Lucas and Sophie would ride their bikes up and down the driveway, setting up lemonade stands during summer weekends. We even installed security cameras and lighting along the path, making it our own little sanctuary. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, though we mostly kept to ourselves. That all changed when Richard Martinez took over as HOA president. At first, it was just the usual stuff. Notices about grass height, requests to power wash the fence, the kind of things you expect from an HOA. But then we started noticing strangers using our driveway as a shortcut to the community park behind our property. I didn't think much of it until one morning when I found tire tracks across our lawn where someone had clearly used our driveway to turn around. When I brought it up at the next HOA meeting, Richard's response left me speechless. "Actually, Mr. Thompson," he said, shuffling through some papers, "according to our records, your driveway has been designated as a public access road to the community park. It's been that way since before you purchased the property." I felt my face grow hot. "That's impossible," I argued. "It's on my property. I pay taxes on it. I maintain it." Karen Wilson, the HOA manager, chimed in with that condescending tone that made my skin crawl. The previous owner agreed to this arrangement. "It's all in the documentation." Documentation? I'd read every paper before signing. There was nothing about my driveway being a public road. But Richard and Karen acted like this was old news, something I should have known all along. That night, I dug through every document from our home purchase. Property surveys, deeds, HOA guidelines, everything. And guess what? Not a single mention of any public access agreement. When I shared this with Emma, she suggested we install a gate to protect our property. Little did we know that gate would spark a war that would turn our quiet suburban life upside down. The morning I decided to install our gate was crisp and clear, perfect for starting a project that would protect our property rights. I hired a local contractor, made sure we had all the proper permits, and even double-checked our property lines. The gate wasn't anything fancy, just a solid, automatic swing gate with keypad access. We even added an intercom system for visitors and delivery drivers. Within hours of the gate's installation, my phone started buzzing. Karen Wilson's number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, but the HOA wasn't done. By that afternoon, I had 3 missed calls and an email marked urgent, violation of community access rights. The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive threats. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it began, "it has come to our attention that you have erected an unauthorized barrier blocking a designated public access route. This action constitutes a severe violation of community guidelines and restricts resident access to common areas." I showed the email to Emma, who'd just returned from picking up Lucas and Sophie from school. "They're acting like we built a fortress," she said, shaking her head. "It's just a gate on our private driveway." That weekend, things escalated. We were having breakfast when Lucas came running inside, excitement in his voice. "Dad, there's a bunch of people at the gate." Sure enough, Richard Martinez had organized what looked like a neighborhood protest. About 20 residents stood by our gate, some holding signs that read, "Public access now," and "Stop the blockade." Richard, wearing his signature polo shirt, tucked into khakis, was addressing the group like some kind of suburban revolutionary. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I walked down the driveway. The protesters quieted as I approached, but Richard stepped forward, chest puffed out. "Thompson," he said, "this has gone far enough. Remove this gate immediately, or the HOA will be forced to take legal action." "Legal action?" I couldn't help but laugh. "For protecting my private property?" "This isn't just your property," Karen Wilson chimed in from the crowd. "This access road has served the community for years. You can't just cut people off from the park." I kept my voice steady, though my blood was boiling. "Show me one document. Just one. That proves this is a public access road. I'll wait." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Linda Chen, our neighbor from 2 houses down, spoke up. "I've lived here for 12 years, she said. "People have always used this path to get to the park. Using something doesn't make it public property," I responded. "This is my driveway on my land that I pay taxes on. If you want to access the park, use the main entrance like everyone else." Richard's face reddened. "The HOA board will be meeting tomorrow to discuss this situation. I suggest you reconsider your position before then." As the crowd dispersed, Linda lingered behind. Once everyone was out of earshot, she approached me. "David, be careful," she warned. When the Andersons tried to build a fence last year, the HOA made their lives hell until they gave in. That night, Emma and I sat on our back porch watching Lucas and Sophie play in the yard. "Maybe we should just remove the gate," Emma suggested, worry lines creasing her forehead. "Is it worth all this trouble?" I thought about it for a moment, watching our kids chase each other around the yard we'd worked so hard to make our own. If we give in now, what's next? They'll keep pushing until we have no say over our own property. The next day, true to Richard's word, an official letter arrived from the HOA. It wasn't just a violation notice this time, it was a threat of legal action. The HOA was demanding we remove the gate within 48 hours or face a lawsuit for willful obstruction of community access and violation of HOA bylaws. I immediately called James Sullivan, a property rights lawyer recommended by a business associate. As I explained the situation, he listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification about dates and documents. "Send me everything you have," he said after I finished. "Property deeds, surveys, HOA guidelines, communication records, everything. They're counting on you backing down, but if what you're telling me is accurate, they don't have a leg to stand on." That evening, as I scanned documents to send to James, I discovered something interesting in our property survey. The park access point they were fighting for. It wasn't even properly aligned with our driveway. The actual public access path was supposed to be 30 feet to the east, through an undeveloped strip of land the HOA had never bothered to maintain. I also found photos from the previous owner showing the driveway had always been private, complete, with no trespassing signs that had mysteriously disappeared shortly after Richard became HOA president. As I compiled the evidence, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't about park access. This was about power, about an HOA drunk on authority trying to bully residents into submission. But they'd picked the wrong family to push around. Next morning, another group had gathered at our gate. This time, Richard had brought a news crew from the local station. As they set up their camera, I could hear him spinning his tale about the inconsiderate homeowner who'd cut off the community's access to their beloved park. I smiled, thinking about the documents sitting in James Sullivan's office. Let them put on their show. The real drama was about to begin, and I had a feeling Richard Martinez wasn't going to like how this story ended. That afternoon, I received a text from Linda. HOA emergency meeting called for tomorrow night. They're voting on legal action against you. Thought you should know. I thanked her for the heads up, then called James to update him on the situation. His response was exactly what I needed to hear. Let them have their meeting, he said. Let them vote. Every action they take without proper authority just strengthens our case. Keep documenting everything, and whatever you do, don't remove that gate. As I hung up the phone, I watched through our security cameras as another resident tried to punch in random codes on our gate keypad. The HOA had started a war over a driveway, but they were about to learn a lesson about property rights that would change Oak Ridge Estates. When faced with a legal battle, preparation becomes your strongest ally. The morning after the HOA's emergency meeting announcement, I sat down at my home office and began methodically planning our defense.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
My years in the construction supply business had taught me the importance of documentation, and now those skills would prove invaluable. First, I pulled up our property's original survey from when we purchased the home. The document clearly showed our driveway was entirely within our property lines, with no easements or public access rights marked. I also found photos from our home inspection showing the previous no trespassing signs that had mysteriously vanished after Richard Martinez took office. I called our title company and requested every document related to our property going back 30 years. If there had ever been any agreement about public access, it would have to be recorded somewhere. While waiting for those records, I started compiling a timeline of events since we moved in. Emma helped me gather security camera footage showing increased traffic on our driveway after Richard became HOA president. We had clips of people using our driveway as a turnaround, kids cutting through on bikes, and even a delivery truck that had damaged our landscaping while trying to make a three-point turn. The most damning evidence came from Linda Chen. She stopped by one evening, looking nervous but determined. "I found something you need to see," she said, pulling out a folder. Inside were minutes from HOA meetings dating back 5 years. "I've been the unofficial record keeper, and I never throw anything away." The documents revealed something crucial. 3 years ago, the HOA had actually tried to purchase an easement through our property for park access. The previous owner had refused, and the matter was dropped. There was no mention of any pre-existing public access rights because there weren't any. James Sullivan was thrilled when I shared these findings. "This is exactly what we need," he said during our next meeting. They knew they needed to purchase an easement, which proves they were aware they had no legal right to claim your driveway as public access. We spent hours developing our strategy. James suggested we file a countersuit for harassment and attempt to recover damages for the stress and property damage we'd endured. He also recommended installing additional security cameras to document any attempts to vandalize or compromise the gate. That's when Emma had a brilliant idea. "What about the real public access path?" she asked. "The one shown on the original plans?" We pulled up the property maps again, looking at the undeveloped strip of land 30 feet east of our driveway. It was overgrown and unused, but according to the plans, this was the actual designated access point to the park. I hired a professional surveyor to mark the boundaries of this public access path. The results were enlightening. The HOA had allowed the actual public access to become completely overgrown while trying to force residents to use our private driveway instead. The next day, I received notice that the HOA had voted to proceed with legal action against us. Richard Martinez himself delivered the letter, wearing what I can only describe as a smug grin. "You have one last chance to remove the gate voluntarily," he said. "Otherwise, we'll see you in court." I remained calm, thinking about all the evidence we'd gathered. "Looking forward to it," I replied. "By the way, have you checked on the actual public access path lately? The one the HOA is responsible for maintaining?" His expression faltered slightly. "What are you talking about?" "The designated public access path, 30 feet east of my driveway. It's right there in the original community plans. Funny how that never came up in any of your meetings." Richard's face reddened. "That's not. We'll have our lawyers review everything." As he walked away, I could see the wheels turning in his head. They'd built their entire case on bullying tactics and false claims, never expecting someone would actually fight back with facts and documentation. That evening, I noticed increased activity on our security cameras. Board members were walking the property line, studying the survey markers we'd had placed. Karen Wilson was there too, gesturing animatedly as she looked between our driveway and the overgrown public access path. James called later with updates on our counterfiling. "We're in a strong position," he said. "Not only can we prove their claims are baseless, but we can show a pattern of harassment and deliberate misrepresentation. They're going to have a hard time explaining why they've been trying to appropriate your private property while neglecting the actual public access path." The next few days were tense. More residents started approaching us, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. It seemed Richard Martinez had made a habit of pushing people around, counting on them being too intimidated or financially constrained to fight back. Lucas and Sophie picked up on the stress, despite our efforts to shield them from it. "Dad," Lucas asked one evening, "are we going to have to move?" I pulled him close. "No, buddy, we're staying right here. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Emma and I spent our evenings reviewing documents and planning our next moves. We knew the HOA would try to wear us down, but we were prepared for a long fight. This wasn't just about our driveway anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who'd gotten too comfortable abusing their power. Just as we were finalizing our countersuit documentation, Linda rushed over with news from another emergency HOA meeting. "They're getting nervous," she said. "Some board members are questioning Richard's handling of the situation. They're worried about legal exposure." The next phase of our battle required meticulous attention to detail. James Sullivan advised us to document every aspect of our property rights and the HOA's overreach. I spent a full weekend gathering technical specifications that would prove crucial to our case. First came the property survey records. The official documentation showed our lot measured 1.2 acres, with the driveway occupying approximately 4,000 square feet. The survey stakes clearly marked our property lines, leaving no doubt that the driveway fell entirely within our boundaries. I hired Mark Peterson, a certified civil engineer, to assess our driveway's construction and safety features. His report detailed several key points. The driveway was built to residential specifications. The drainage system was designed for single-family use. The lighting and security features were consistent with private, residential standards. The gate installation complied with all local building codes. The report explicitly stated that the driveway wasn't designed or constructed for public access, which would have required different specifications entirely. This technical assessment would prove invaluable in court. Our security system provided another layer of documentation. I upgraded our cameras to high-resolution models with night vision and installed a sophisticated access control system that logged every attempt to enter our property. The data showed a disturbing pattern. After Richard Martinez became HOA president, attempted access through our driveway increased by 300%. Emma suggested we conduct a traffic study. We hired a professional firm to monitor activity around our property for 2 weeks. The results were eye-opening. 47 attempted unauthorized entries through our driveway, 15 instances of vehicles turning around on our lawn, 23 attempts to bypass the gate's security system, 0 maintenance of the actual public access path by the HOA. Meanwhile, James had been researching local ordinances and building codes. He discovered something interesting. The HOA's claim about our driveway being a public access route directly contradicted city zoning requirements. For a roadway to be designated as public access, it needed specific safety features and maintenance, protocols that our residential driveway simply didn't have. The real breakthrough came when we obtained records from the City Planning Office. The original development plans for Oak Ridge Estates clearly showed the designated public access path, the overgrown strip 30 feet east of our driveway. These documents included original zoning permits, public access easement, specifications, required maintenance schedules for common areas, safety requirements for public pathways. Armed with this information, we asked our surveyor to mark out the actual public access path. The results were damning. The HOA had not only neglected to maintain this designated route, but had actively encouraged people to use our private driveway instead. Linda Chen provided another crucial piece of evidence. Maintenance records showing the HOA had deliberately stopped maintaining the public access path 3 years ago, right around the time Richard Martinez took office. The decision wasn't documented in any official meeting minutes, suggesting it was made without proper authority. I compiled all this technical data into a comprehensive report, including property surveys and deed restrictions, engineering assessments of our driveway, security system logs and footage, traffic study results, city planning documents, HOA maintenance records, building code compliance certificates, gate installation, permits. The evidence painted a clear picture. The HOA had systematically attempted to appropriate our private property while neglecting their actual responsibilities. Their claims about public access rights were not only false, but deliberately misleading. James reviewed our documentation with growing confidence. "This is exactly what we need," he said. "They can't argue with technical specifications and official records. The facts are on our side." We also discovered something interesting about the park access situation. The city's Parks Department had plans to create a proper access point on the other side of the park, complete with parking and facilities. The HOA had been notified of these plans, but hadn't shared this information with residents. As we prepared our technical defense, Richard Martinez made one last attempt to intimidate us. He sent a professional assessment, claiming our gate posed safety risks. The document was laughably amateur, full of vague statements and unsupported claims. I responded by sending him copies of our actual professional assessments, building permits, and safety certifications. His only reply was a terse email saying the HOA's lawyers would review the documentation. Emma spent hours organizing all our evidence into clear chronological order. She created a timeline showing how the HOA's actions correlated with Richard's appointment as president and their subsequent attempts to claim our driveway as public property. The technical details were overwhelming in our favor. Every document, every survey, every assessment supported our position. The HOA's case was built on assumptions and bullying tactics, while ours was founded on concrete evidence and legal documentation. As we finalized our technical documentation, Linda brought news that several HOA board members were expressing serious concerns about proceeding with the lawsuit. The technical evidence we'd gathered had made it clear that their position was untenable. James advised us to prepare for the HOA's next move. "They'll either back down or double down," he said. "Either way, we're ready." Our thorough documentation had transformed a neighborhood dispute into a clear-cut case of property rights violation, and we were prepared to prove it in court. The morning we began our legal preparation felt like the calm before a storm. The first step was critical, documenting every interaction with the HOA through professional channels. They hired a certified process server to deliver our response to their lawsuit threat, making sure everything was properly recorded. Our security cameras captured Richard Martinez's reaction when he received our counter notice. His usual confident strut turned into an agitated pace as he read through our documented evidence of the HOA's negligence regarding the actual public access path. James Sullivan's first official action was to file a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from interfering with our property while the case was pending. The filing included certified property surveys, gate installation permits, security footage of unauthorized access attempts, documentation of property damage, evidence of HOA harassment. Judge Patricia Morgan granted the restraining order within 24 hours. Her decision cited substantial evidence of potential property rights violations and ordered the HOA to cease all attempts to access or interfere with our driveway. The HOA's reaction was immediate. Karen Wilson sent an email to all residents claiming we were obstructing community access and violating HOA bylaws. But this time, we were prepared. James responded with a cease and desist letter, warning that any further false statements would be added to our growing list of complaints. Linda Chen proved invaluable during this phase. She provided copies of internal HOA communications showing Richard Martinez had actually discussed purchasing an easement through our property before deciding to simply claim it as public access. This evidence suggested premeditation in their attempts to seize control of our driveway. Emma focused on organizing resident testimonies. Several neighbors came forward with similar stories of HOA overreach. The Petersons had been forced to remove their garden fence. The Ramirez family had their home-based business shut down without cause. The Wilsons had been fined for parking their RV in their own garage. Each case showed a pattern of the HOA exceeding its authority. Under Richard's leadership, we carefully documented each testimony, building a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse of power. Our first major victory came when the City Planning Office responded to our information request. They confirmed that the actual public access path had been clearly designated in the original development plans, and the HOA was responsible for its maintenance. The documents showed yearly maintenance requirements that had been ignored since Richard took office. The HOA's attorney, Michael Brooks, reached out to discuss settlement options. His tone suggested they were starting to realize the weakness of their position, but their initial offer was laughable. We would remove the gate. They would allow us to maintain the driveway. We would drop all counterclaims. They would waive any future fines. James advised us to reject the offer outright. Instead, we presented our terms: full acknowledgement of our property rights, compensation for legal fees and property damage, HOA board member training on property rights, restoration of the actual public access path, implementation of new bylaws preventing similar overreach. Richard Martinez's response was predictable. He called an emergency HOA meeting, attempting to rally support for their legal fight. But the tide was turning. Residents had seen our evidence, and many were questioning the board's decisions. The local media caught wind of the story. A reporter from the city newspaper contacted us for an interview. After consulting with James, we agreed to provide documentation but declined direct comment on the ongoing legal proceedings. The article ran the following Sunday. HOA accused of property rights violations, residents fight back. It detailed the HOA's attempt to claim private property as public access while neglecting their actual responsibilities. Richard Martinez's quote in the article only made things worse. The needs of the community outweigh individual property rights. That statement became a rallying point for other residents. More people came forward with their own stories of HOA overreach. James began collecting these testimonies as evidence of a larger pattern of abuse. Our preparations were methodical and thorough. Every document was properly filed, every interaction recorded, every piece of evidence carefully preserved. We weren't just building a legal defense. We were creating a blueprint for other homeowners to fight back against HOA abuse. As the court date approached, we received unexpected support. The city's Parks Department released plans for a new park access point, complete with proper parking and facilities. This development undermined the HOA's claim that our driveway was necessary for park access. The HOA's position was crumbling, but Richard Martinez refused to back down. His pride had become entangled with the outcome, and he seemed willing to risk everything to avoid admitting defeat. Emma worried about the mounting legal costs, but I reminded her what was at stake. This isn't just about our driveway anymore. I said, it's about standing up to bullies who think they can take what isn't theirs. James assured us our case was solid. They built their argument on sand, he said. We've built ours on concrete evidence and legal precedent. They're going to learn an expensive lesson about property rights. The stage was set for a legal battle that would change how HOAs operated in our community. We had the evidence, the law, and increasingly, public opinion on our side. The question wasn't if we would win, but how much damage the HOA would do to itself before admitting defeat. Our legal proceedings gained unexpected momentum when 3 former HOA board members contacted James Sullivan. They had resigned under Richard Martinez's leadership, and their testimonies revealed a disturbing pattern of deliberate overreach. The first hearing was set for a Wednesday morning. As we entered the courthouse, we noticed Richard and Karen huddled with their attorney, Michael Brooks. Their confident facades had cracked, replaced by worried glances and hushed conversations. Judge Morgan started by reviewing our evidence. Property surveys proving our driveway's private status, documentation of the neglected public access path, security footage showing increased trespassing, records of HOA harassment and intimidation, testimonies from former board members. The HOA's defense crumbled quickly. Their attorney tried arguing historical precedent for using our driveway, but Judge Morgan wasn't impressed. Historical unauthorized use doesn't create legal rights, she stated firmly. Meanwhile, our case grew stronger. Linda Chen discovered minutes from a private board meeting where Richard had explicitly stated his plan to force compliance through aggressive action. This document proved crucial in demonstrating the HOA's malicious intent. The turning point came when Michael Brooks attempted to present the HOA's evidence. Their case relied heavily on unsigned agreements with the previous owner, undated photographs of people using our driveway, vague references to community needs, unsubstantiated safety concerns. Judge Morgan's patience visibly thinned as Brooks fumbled through their weak arguments. When he mentioned implied easement rights, she interrupted sharply. "Counselor, are you suggesting that trespassing creates legal rights?" During a recess, James received an unexpected call. The City Council had reviewed our case and decided to fast-track the development of the new park access point. This development effectively eliminated any argument about public necessity for using our driveway. Richard Martinez's testimony proved disastrous for the HOA's case. Under cross-examination, he admitted no formal vote had approved claiming our driveway. The board had discussed purchasing an easement. They had deliberately stopped maintaining the legal access path. Personal animosity influenced his decisions. The courtroom tensed when James presented evidence of the HOA's selective enforcement. Other properties had similar private driveways, but only ours had been targeted. This pattern suggested personal vendetta rather than legitimate community concern. Emma's testimony resonated strongly. She described the stress on our family. Lucas and Sophie's fear of playing outside, constant surveillance and harassment, damage to our property and landscaping, community ostracism orchestrated by the board. The judge's questions focused increasingly on the HOA's authority. Each answer exposed their overreach. When Karen Wilson tried explaining their comprehensive community access plan, Judge Morgan asked pointedly about the neglected public access path. Karen had no response. Public opinion shifted dramatically during the proceedings. Local news covered the case, and other homeowners associations watched closely. Our story became a cautionary tale about HOA power abuse. Support came from unexpected quarters. The National Homeowners' Rights Association contacted James, offering resources and expertise. They saw our case as an opportunity to establish precedent against HOA overreach. Richard's behavior grew increasingly erratic. During one heated exchange, he shouted about community rights superseding individual property. Judge Morgan warned him about contempt of court. His outburst only reinforced our claims about abuse of power. The HOA's attorney made several attempts to settle. First offer, remove gate, maintain driveway rights. Second offer, share access with limited hours. Third offer, monetary compensation, keep gate. Final offer, full property rights, partial legal. Fees, we rejected each offer. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about establishing clear boundaries and preventing future abuse. As the case progressed, more evidence emerged. Financial records showing misused HOA funds, emails revealing coordinated harassment, campaigns, documentation of other illegal property claims, proof of falsified meeting minutes. The HOA board began fracturing. 2 members resigned, citing ethical concerns. Karen Wilson took medical leave, leaving Richard increasingly isolated. Our neighborhood changed too. Residents who had avoided us now offered support. The community began questioning other HOA policies and decisions. Judge Morgan's intense scrutiny of the HOA's claims clearly indicated her position. During the final arguments, she repeatedly challenged their legal basis for claiming any rights to our property. As we neared the end of this phase, James felt confident. They've got nothing, he said. No legal standing, no documentation, no legitimate claim. The only question now is how severely the judge will penalize them. The case had evolved beyond our driveway. It had become a referendum on HOA power and property rights. The outcome would affect not just our community, but potentially HOAs across the state. Our legal victory came swiftly and decisively. Judge Morgan's ruling left no room for interpretation. Our property rights were absolute, and the HOA had grossly overstepped its authority. The judgment included full recognition of our private property rights, $75,000 in compensatory damages, $50,000 in punitive damages, complete coverage of legal fees, mandatory HOA board restructuring. Richard Martinez resigned immediately after the ruling. His parting email to residents blamed activist judges and uncooperative homeowners for undermining community values. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The remaining board members moved quickly to comply with the court's orders. Formally acknowledged our driveway as private property, began restoration of the proper public access path, implemented new bylaws limiting HOA authority, established clear property rights guidelines, created an appeals process for homeowner disputes. Linda Chen was elected as the new HOA president. Her first action was to issue a public apology to our family and commit to transparency in all future board decisions. The transformation in our community was remarkable. Neighbors who had avoided us now stopped to chat. Other homeowners began challenging unfair HOA rules. Community meetings became collaborative rather than confrontational. Property rights became a priority in decision-making. The atmosphere of fear and intimidation dissipated. Emma noticed the change in our children first. Lucas and Sophie started playing outside freely again, no longer worried about being watched or harassed. The tension that had hung over our home for months finally lifted. The actual public access path was completed within 2 months, properly graded and paved, well lit with security features, clear signage marking public access, regular maintenance schedule, connecting directly to park facilities. Our case became a reference point for other communities. James received requests from lawyers nationwide for documentation of our strategy. Property rights organizations cited our victory in their educational materials. The local media followed up with a comprehensive story, detailed the HOA's abuse of power, highlighted the importance of property rights, examined the impact on community governance, discussed the broader implications for HOAs, and featured positive changes in Oak Ridge Estates. Karen Wilson approached us privately to apologize. She admitted the board had known they had no legal right to our driveway, but had followed Richard's lead out of misguided loyalty. The final validation came from our property values. Instead of declining as Richard had threatened, they increased. Buyers were attracted to a community that respected property rights and had clear governance guidelines. Our driveway remained private, marked by a tasteful gate with proper security, clear private property signage, professional landscaping, security cameras, well-maintained surfaces. The experience changed us too. I joined the new HOA advisory board, helping craft policies that balance community interests with individual rights. Emma started a homeowners advocacy group. Looking back, the ordeal taught us valuable lessons. Standing up to bullies requires courage and preparation. Documentation and legal knowledge are powerful tools. Community support can emerge from unexpected places. Property rights must be actively defended. Positive change often starts. With one person saying no, our victory wasn't just about keeping our driveway private. It was about establishing that homeowners associations exist to serve their members, not control them. The gate still stands, not just as an entrance to our property, but as a symbol of standing up for what's right. The morning after our legal victory, we discovered the HOA had filed an appeal. A thick manila envelope arrived containing their new allegations. They were now claiming our driveway constituted a critical emergency access route and that closing it posed a public safety hazard. Their appeal rested on 3 main arguments: emergency vehicle access requirements, historical use patterns, community safety concerns. James Sullivan was furious when he reviewed their filing. "This is a desperate move," he said. "They're trying to use public safety as a backdoor to seize private property." The new HOA board, led by Richard Martinez's last remaining allies, had hired a different law firm specializing in municipal law. Their strategy was to reframe the issue as a public safety matter rather than a property rights dispute. Their evidence included a hastily conducted traffic study, unsigned letters from concerned residents, vague references to emergency response times, theoretical scenarios about disaster evacuation. We immediately contacted the local fire department and emergency services for clarification. Their response demolished the HOA's claims. No record of ever using our driveway for emergency access. Official emergency routes clearly documented elsewhere. Adequate existing access points to all properties. No safety concerns about our gate installation. The HOA's desperation became evident in their tactics. Anonymous letters in neighbors' mailboxes, social media campaigns, spreading misinformation, attempts to pressure local officials, false claims about property value impacts. Linda Chen provided crucial intelligence. Again, During a closed-door meeting, she overheard board members discussing their real motivation. They feared other homeowners would follow our example and assert their property rights. The appeal process required new documentation. Updated property surveys, emergency service access reports, gate system specifications, traffic flow analyses, security incident logs. Emma documented every interaction meticulously. Dates and times of HOA contact attempts, records of harassment incidents, photographic evidence of property damage, witness statements from neighbors, security camera footage. The community's reaction was mixed. Some residents saw through the HOA's tactics. Others worried about emergency access. Many just wanted the conflict to end. A few vocal supporters emerged. Several remained suspiciously neutral. James filed our response to the appeal. Comprehensive safety, documentation, expert testimonials, property rights precedents, evidence of HOA malice, detailed legal arguments. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. During this time, the HOA launched a coordinated campaign of intimidation. Daily drive-bys photographing our property, false complaints to city officials, attempts to contact our employers, pressure on sympathetic neighbors, public smear campaigns. We remained resolute, knowing their actions only strengthened our case. The documentation continued to grow, painting a clear picture of harassment and abuse of power. The truth was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't about safety at all. It was about an HOA desperate to maintain control, willing to use any means necessary to prevent homeowners from asserting their rights. As we prepared for the appeal hearing, community support grew stronger. Other residents began sharing their own stories of HOA overreach, creating a powerful narrative of systematic abuse of power. The stage was set for another legal battle, but this time we were better prepared and had the community behind us. The HOA's desperate tactics had only served to expose their true motives and strengthen our resolve. Their attempt to use public safety as a weapon would soon backfire spectacularly, leading to consequences they never anticipated. The appeal hearing dawned with tension thick in the air. We arrived at the courthouse to find the HOA's new legal team had brought a supposed public safety expert, retired Fire Chief Walter Brooks, who had never actually served in our district. As the hearing began, their new attorney, Sarah Palmer, launched into a dramatic presentation about theoretical emergency scenarios. She painted vivid pictures of trapped residents, delayed ambulances, and potential disasters. All hypothetical situations that hinged on access to our private driveway. James Sullivan remained calm, methodically dismantling their arguments. When Walter Brooks took the stand, James's cross-examination exposed critical flaws in his testimony. Mr. Brooks, have you ever personally inspected our client's property? Well, no, but have you reviewed the official emergency access routes for Oak Ridge Estates? I looked at some maps. Are you aware that there are 3 designated emergency access points that don't involve private property? I wasn't provided that information. The current fire chief, Robert Martinez, no relation to Richard, testified next. His statement effectively ended their safety argument. The Thompson property's private driveway has never been part of our emergency response plans. The designated access routes fully meet all safety requirements. During a recess, we overheard Sarah Palmer arguing with Richard Martinez in the hallway. "You didn't tell me about the existing emergency routes," she hissed. "This is making us look foolish." The afternoon session focused on the HOA's true motivations. James presented internal emails showing board members discussing how to make an example of us to prevent other homeowners from asserting their rights. When Richard Martinez took the stand, his facade finally cracked under questioning. "Mr. Martinez, why didn't the HOA maintain the designated public access path?" "We had budget constraints." Yet you spent $50,000 on legal fees to claim private property? The community needed... Isn't it true that you personally directed the board to target our clients? I was protecting community interests. By ignoring legally designated access routes and attempting to seize private property. His outburst that followed proved devastating. Someone had to stop these people from thinking they could do whatever they wanted with their property. The appeals judge's eyebrows shot up. The courtroom fell silent. In one unguarded moment, Richard had revealed the true essence of their campaign against us. James seized the moment, presenting evidence of the HOA's pattern of harassment. Documented intimidation attempts, false safety complaints, coordinated social pressure, financial retaliation, attempts, deliberate spreading of misinformation. The judge's questions turned increasingly skeptical of the HOA's position. When Sarah Palmer attempted to redirect attention to theoretical safety concerns, he cut her off. "Counselor, I'm more concerned with the actual pattern of harassment evidenced here." Richard Martinez sat slumped in his chair, his earlier confidence replaced by defeated resignation. The HOA board members who had accompanied him looked increasingly uncomfortable as James methodically exposed their coordinated campaign of intimidation. The final blow came when Linda Chen testified about the board's closed-door meetings. Her detailed accounts of their discussions revealed a calculated effort to use safety concerns as a pretext for maintaining control over residents. The appeal judge's ruling was unequivocal. Not only was the appeal denied, but additional sanctions were imposed on the HOA for filing a frivolous appeal and continuing their pattern of harassment. The judge's closing remarks resonated through the courtroom. This case represents a disturbing abuse of authority by those entrusted with community governance. Property rights are fundamental, and attempts to circumvent them through intimidation and false safety claims will not be tolerated. As we left the courthouse, several neighbors waited to offer support. The community had witnessed the full extent of the HOA's overreach, and the atmosphere of fear was finally lifting. That evening, we received word that the remaining hostile board members had resigned. The era of HOA intimidation in Oak Ridge Estates had come to an end, but the lessons learned would ensure it never happened again. Our legal defense shifted into high gear after the failed HOA appeal. James Sullivan developed a comprehensive counter-strategy focusing on permanent protection of our property rights. The first phase involved documenting ongoing harassment. Security cameras captured HOA members conducting daily inspections of our property. These recordings proved invaluable when we filed for a permanent restraining order. During our strategy session, James outlined our approach. We're not just defending property rights anymore. We're setting precedent to prevent this from happening to others. The City Council became involved when evidence emerged of the HOA's systematic abuse of power. Councilwoman Patricia Chen initiated an investigation into HOA practices across the district, using our case as a catalyst for reform. Our documentation revealed Richard Martinez's network of influence. He had allies in the city planning office who had deliberately delayed approval of the proper public access path. James subpoenaed their communications, exposing years of coordinated efforts to expand HOA control. We filed motions to 1. Establish permanent property protections, 2. Recover additional damages from continued harassment, 3. Reform HOA governance structures, 4. Implement oversight mechanisms, 5. Secure long-term access rights documentation. The HOA's remaining supporters launched a last-ditch effort to maintain control. They circulated petitions claiming our actions would destroy property values and endanger community safety. These desperate moves only strengthened our position. Emma organized a community meeting to share the truth. In the local community center, we presented 1. Complete property documentation, 2. Safety assessment reports, 3. Property value trends, 4. Legal rights education, 5. Future community plans. The tide turned decisively when former board members began providing sworn statements about Richard's leadership. They described systematic intimidation, selective enforcement, and deliberate misuse of HOA authority. James prepared comprehensive legal filings detailing 1. Constitutional property rights, 2. HOA authority limitations, 3. Due process requirements, 4. Enforcement boundaries, 5. Resident protections. Our case attracted attention from property rights organizations nationwide. The National Homeowners' Rights Association provided additional legal resources and expertise, recognizing the potential impact on HOA governance across the country. The local media coverage expanded beyond our specific case. Investigative reporters uncovered similar patterns of abuse in other HOAs, creating momentum for broader reform. As pressure mounted, remaining HOA board members approached us about negotiation. Their position had weakened significantly, and they feared personal liability for their actions. James advised caution. "They're looking for an easy exit," he warned. "We need lasting changes, not quick fixes." We developed non-negotiable terms. 1. Permanent property rights protection. 2. Governance reform requirements. 3. Oversight mechanisms. 4. Compensation for damages. 5. Public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The HOA's response revealed their desperation. They offered to drop all claims and pay damages if we would sign a non-disclosure agreement. We refused. Community support continued growing. Residents shared stories of past HOA abuse, creating a compelling narrative of systematic overreach that demanded reform. Our strategy evolved to address broader issues. 1. Property rights education. 2. HOA power limitations. 3. Resident protection mechanisms. 4. Transparency requirements. 5. Appeal process reforms. The confrontation had transformed from a private property dispute into a movement for HOA reform. Our experience became a blueprint for other homeowners facing similar challenges. James prepared final legal documents establishing 1. Clear property boundaries. 2. Access rights documentation. 3. HOA authority limitations. 4. Enforcement guidelines. 5. Resident protection mechanisms. The stage was set for permanent change in Oak Ridge Estates. Our strategy had evolved from defensive protection to proactive reform, ensuring that no future homeowner would face similar abuse of power. Resolution process. The final phase of our legal battle began with an unexpected turn. The County Commissioner's Office launched an investigation into HOA practices across the district, using our case as a catalyst. Their findings revealed widespread abuse of power extending far beyond Oak Ridge Estates. James Sullivan coordinated with state investigators, providing our extensive documentation of the HOA's actions. The investigation uncovered a disturbing network of relationships between certain HOA boards and local officials, designed to expand HOA authority beyond legal limits. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Morgan reviewed the investigation findings. Richard Martinez sat with his new legal team, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible concern. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic abuse, altered records, selective enforcement, coordinated harassment campaigns, and deliberate misuse of HOA authority. Our expert witnesses presented compelling testimony about proper HOA governance and property rights. The fire chief's testimony definitively dismissed safety concerns about our driveway, while property assessors confirmed our gate installation had actually increased nearby home values. The HOA's defense crumbled under cross-examination. Their attempts to justify their actions through community interests only highlighted their disregard for individual property rights. When questioned about the neglected public access path, they could provide no legitimate explanation for prioritizing seizure of private property over maintaining designated public routes. Through tears, Emma testified about the impact on our family. She described Lucas's anxiety about playing outside, Sophie's fear of neighborhood bullies encouraged by HOA leadership, and the constant stress of living under surveillance. Her testimony resonated with other residents who had faced similar intimidation. Linda Chen's documentation proved crucial. Years of meeting minutes, emails, and internal memos revealed a calculated campaign to expand HOA control through intimidation and selective enforcement. The evidence showed Richard Martinez had personally directed efforts to target homeowners who challenged HOA authority. The county commissioner's testimony shifted the case's scope. She described similar patterns across multiple HOAs, suggesting our experience reflected a broader abuse of power. Her office recommended comprehensive reforms to HOA governance, using our case as a template for change. James presented our final arguments with quiet confidence. He emphasized not just the HOA's violations of our property rights, but their deliberate abuse of authority and subsequent attempts to cover their actions through false safety claims. The pattern of harassment, he argued, demonstrated the need for fundamental HOA reform. The HOA's closing arguments fell flat. Their attempts to reframe their actions as community protection couldn't overcome the weight of evidence showing deliberate abuse of power. Their legal team's body language suggested they knew their position was untenable. Judge Morgan's ruling exceeded our expectations. She not only affirmed our property rights, but also ordered comprehensive HOA reforms, mandatory board training, independent oversight, transparent decision-making processes, and clear limits on HOA authority. The ruling established precedent for protecting homeowner rights against HOA overreach. The financial penalties were substantial: compensation for property damage, legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive damages designed to deter similar behavior by other HOAs. More importantly, the ruling required the HOA to establish clear procedures for protecting property rights and limiting board authority. Richard Martinez resigned immediately after the ruling, along with his remaining allies on the board. The new board, led by reform-minded residents, began implementing changes to prevent future abuse. They prioritized transparency, resident rights, and proper maintenance of community property. The impact extended beyond Oak Ridge Estates. Other HOAs began proactively reforming their governance structures, fearing similar legal challenges. Property rights organizations cited our case in advocating for HOA reform legislation. The local media covered these changes, highlighting the broader implications of our victory. Residents who had feared speaking out now shared their stories of HOA intimidation. The atmosphere of fear lifted as people realized they could assert their rights without retaliation. Community meetings transformed from confrontational to collaborative as the new board emphasized resident participation and transparency. Our driveway remained private, but the true victory was broader. We had established that HOA authority has limits, that property rights matter, and that homeowners can successfully challenge abuse of power. The precedent we set would protect other homeowners from similar overreach. Looking back, the resolution process taught us valuable lessons about standing firm against intimidation, the importance of documentation, and the power of community support. Our experience became a blueprint for protecting property rights and reforming HOA governance, ensuring lasting change in Oak Ridge Estates and beyond. The victory in Oak Ridge Estates rippled through homeowners associations nationwide. Local newspapers picked up our story, leading to investigative reports about HOA overreach in other communities. The headline, private driveway battle exposes. Your power abuse sparked conversations about property rights across the country. Within months, state legislators began drafting new laws governing HOA authority. The Thompson Property Rights Act proposed clear limitations on HOA powers and established robust protections for homeowners. Legal experts cited our case as a turning point in HOA governance. Oak Ridge Estates transformed under new leadership. The reformed HOA board, now led by community-minded residents, implemented transparent policies and fair enforcement procedures. Monthly meetings became collaborative discussions rather than confrontational mandates. The properly maintained public access path to the park stood as a visible reminder of positive change. Richard Martinez's departure marked the end of an era. Former board members later admitted to a culture of intimidation under his leadership. Their testimonies helped other communities identify and prevent similar abuse of power. The investigation into misused HOA funds led to additional legal consequences for the former leadership. Our family's life returned to normal, though forever, changed by the experience. Lucas and Sophie played freely in our yard again, no longer anxious about neighborhood politics. Emma's homeowner advocacy group grew into a respected resource for property rights education. Our driveway, still private and gated, symbolized the importance of standing firm against injustice. The property values in Oak Ridge Estates rose as the community's reputation for fair governance attracted new residents. The reformed HOA became a model for others, hosting workshops on balanced community management and resident rights. Real estate agents specifically mentioned the new HOA policies as a selling point. James Sullivan's law practice expanded to specialize in HOA reform cases. He used our documentation as a template for helping other homeowners protect their rights. Property rights organizations incorporated our story into their educational materials, teaching homeowners how to effectively challenge HOA overreach. Linda Chen's role in exposing the abuse earned her recognition as a community leader. Her detailed records became a case study in the importance of documenting HOA activities. The new board established a permanent resident oversight committee, ensuring transparency in all decisions affecting property rights. The City Council implemented new requirements for HOA certification and training. Board members now had to demonstrate understanding of property rights and governance limitations. Annual audits ensured compliance with reformed policies. The changes spread to neighboring communities, creating a regional movement for HOA reform. Local media followed up 1 year later, documenting the positive changes in Oak Ridge Estates. Their report highlighted the restored public access path, improved community relations, and successful integration of property rights with community interests. The story inspired other homeowners to advocate for similar reforms. The National Homeowners' Rights Association featured our case in their annual conference. Their presentation explained how proper documentation, legal expertise, and community support could successfully challenge HOA overreach. Attendees from across the country shared similar experiences, creating a network for reform advocacy. 5 years later, Oak Ridge Estates had become unrecognizable from its former state. The community thrived under balanced governance, proving that respecting property rights strengthened rather than weakened neighborhood cohesion. Our driveway dispute had catalyzed lasting change, protecting future homeowners from abuse of power. The experience taught lasting lessons about standing up to bullying, the importance of documenting everything, and the power of community support. Property rights weren't just legal concepts, but fundamental protections of personal freedom. Our victory showed that positive change often starts with one person saying, "Enough." 5 years after our victory, I received an unexpected email from a homeowner in California. They had used our case as a blueprint to successfully challenge their HOA's attempt to seize private property. This prompted me to reflect on how our stand against HOA overreach had created lasting change far beyond Oak Ridge Estates. The Thompson Property Rights Act had been adopted by 12 states, establishing clear boundaries for HOA authority. Our case study became required reading in property law courses, teaching future attorneys about the delicate balance between community governance and individual rights. Law firms across the country cited our precedent in defending homeowners against similar violations. Richard Martinez's downfall had far-reaching consequences. Investigations revealed his involvement in similar schemes across multiple communities. His attempts to expand HOA authority through intimidation had affected hundreds of families. The criminal investigation into misappropriated funds led to broader reforms in HOA financial oversight. Emma's advocacy group evolved into a national organization, providing resources and support for homeowners facing HOA disputes. They developed a comprehensive guide based on our experience, helping others document violations and build effective legal cases. The organization's annual conference became a gathering point for property rights advocates nationwide. Oak Ridge Estates transformed into a model community. The reformed HOA implemented innovative programs combining property rights protection with community enhancement. They established a mediation system for resolving disputes, reducing legal costs, and maintaining neighborly relationships. The community newsletter featured regular updates on property rights, education, and governance transparency. James Sullivan's law practice expanded to multiple states, specializing in HOA reform cases. He developed a legal framework for challenging HOA overreach, incorporating lessons from our case. His team trained other attorneys in property rights defense, creating a network of legal experts dedicated to protecting homeowner rights. Linda Chen's documentation methods became standard practice for HOA oversight. She conducted workshops, teaching residents how to monitor board activities and maintain effective records. Her system for tracking HOA decisions and enforcement actions helped prevent discriminatory practices and abuse of power. The psychological impact on our community gradually healed. Neighbors who had feared speaking out became active participants in governance. The culture of intimidation gave way to open dialogue and collaborative decision-making. Even former supporters of Richard Martinez acknowledged the positive changes brought by balanced governance. Local property values reflected the community's transformation. Real estate agents specifically marketed homes in Oak Ridge Estates as part of a reformed HOA community. The proper maintenance of common areas, clear property rights protections, and transparent governance attracted buyers seeking both community benefits and individual freedoms. The public access path to the park became a symbol of proper community planning. Well maintained and clearly marked, it demonstrated how designated public spaces could coexist with private property rights. The park itself thrived under proper management, hosting community events that brought neighbors together in positive ways. Technology played a crucial role in maintaining reforms. The HOA implemented digital systems for tracking complaints, documenting decisions, and ensuring transparent enforcement. Security cameras protected both private and public spaces without infringing on individual rights. Online forums facilitated open communication between residents and board members. Educational institutions incorporated our story into their curriculum. Business schools used it to teach ethical governance principles. Law schools examined the legal strategies that proved successful in challenging institutional overreach. Social science researchers studied the community's transformation as a model for resolving property rights conflicts. The impact on future generations became apparent as young families moved into Oak Ridge Estates. Children grew up understanding the importance of both community cooperation and individual rights. The annual community fair included educational activities teaching civic responsibility and property rights awareness to young residents. Insurance companies developed new policies specifically addressing HOA liability for property rights violations. The financial consequences of our case prompted HOAs nationwide to review their governance practices. Risk management experts cited our experience in recommending reforms to prevent similar conflicts. The long-term environmental impact proved significant as well. Proper maintenance of common areas and clear boundaries between public and private spaces enhanced local wildlife corridors. The community's balanced approach to property rights extended to environmental stewardship, proving that individual rights and conservation could work together. Up next, you've got two more captivating stories waiting for you. If this deep dive into HOA reform caught your attention, you won't want to miss these related tales. Just click to discover more about property rights and community transformation.